Hi, this is Marlene, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found on MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Go to MarlenePardo.com for information on new book releases. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and can also be listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests on the show. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird, you can visit Strange Than Fiction Stories tab at MiamiGhostChronicles.com or find us on Blogspot. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing well. I know people, my knee is still messed up from the last show. I know people had asked me, how's your knee doing after? And for those of you who didn't catch the last show, I was out with my chickens, of course, and it's been raining here. It's rainy season in Florida, and I didn't realize that the mud where I was stepping on was like a mud pie. And I did one of those, I was trying to do the twist and keep my balance, and I did something to my left knee, and it's still hurting. I walk around with like a limp, and of course my right foot is hurting because I'm putting all this weight on it because it's doing all the work. So yeah, I feel like I'm living on ibuprofen, and as a matter of fact, I'm waiting to go see an orthopedic. But yeah, such is life. But besides that, everything is good. And for those of you who always are asking me, how's the chick scenario? And I had already put videos of the last chicks that we hatched, and that I had bought 5 or 6 of the Rhode Island Reds at a farm supply store by here. And it just so happened that they were close in age to the ones that were hatched. So basically I used my hen, and at night I stuck these new chicks in, and she took them over, and they're fine. They're running around, and there's a video. Now let's update the chicken diary. I had a very small, really small, all white bantam hen. She was like, I'm not kidding, we used to call her the little dove. She's really small. I hatched her way back when I was living in South Florida. And I had mentioned this before, even though I have lattices under some of the sheds that I have, she's so small. Because one of the reasons why we put the lattice, besides is that we didn't want the chickens going in there and making nests and hatching chicks, and then I have to control the population somehow. But she was so small that she could fit in through the lattice, and that's exactly what she did. Okay, she started her own nest. And I could tell one of my dogs that he would, when he goes crazy, and I didn't see her. Long story short, she had been there, and a couple of times she would come out to eat. Something killed her. And I guesstimated she had been on those eggs about 2 weeks. And if anybody knows, it's about a 21-day period for chicken eggs to hatch. 19, 20, 21 days. So I crawled under the shed, and I was able to recover 8 eggs. That's what she had in the nest. She was a real good little mommy. She really kept them warm. And I had some broody hens. She always had broody hens. And, I would be removing their eggs, but they were still broody, so I stuck the eggs under there. And one of the ones that took them over was I have a Polish hen. Her name is Jaja. I've had her for 8 years. She took them over. And the day yesterday morning, I went in there, and one chick was hatched. So I was like, okay, I got to get these chicks and these eggs into a cage by themselves, because if not, other hens go in there, and these were little real chicks, because these are from that small bantam. And I've got her, she's so far, of the 8, she's hatched 6 eggs. One of those things where you lose an animal, but you still got the babies. And I had my fingers crossed, because those eggs were under there like more than a day without a hen on them. And yes, it's incredible to think that this is a show about the paranormal. I'm talking so much about chickens, but what can I say? It's one of those deals. But let's get on to the good part. I will keep on with the chicken diary, and I'll film the chicks, which are beautiful, for the next show. But let me tell you what the good part is, of course, which is who my guest is. And my guest is Mr. Christopher George. And he's been here before. He is the founder of Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. He holds credentials in parapsychology and alternative history. He's a renowned parapsychologist who studied at one of South California's prestigious colleges in their parapsychology laboratory from 1979 to 1982 as a research associate. During his 3-decade career, he's investigated more than 2,500 cases of ghost hauntings, poltergeist, and conducted extensive studies in hauntings, cryptozoology, and the UFO phenomenon. He's also taught paranormal studies to students at Hodges University in South Florida, where he shared many facets of the scientific approach to the paranormal. Yes, the science and the paranormal do meet, believe it or not. His primary career has been in the role of park ranger, and his experience in law enforcement, historical identification, and research has helped him to explore both the physical world and the paranormal world working hand in hand. And I'd like you to help me welcome him back. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing real good, Marlene. How are you doing?
Good.
Besides what happened to your little one.
I'm telling you, it's like sometimes it's like, hey man, I think I need a sitcom or reality show. Even though I think in reality shows are on their way out. But yeah, sometimes it does feel like, things that happen is like, somebody got to come out and be saying, I'm filming you because now let me tell you something. There's nothing like almost falling flat on a mud pie.
Oh.
But anyway, we talked like years ago. I want to say 2018, possibly 2017.
Yeah.
And before we get into, I didn't know till I spoke to you now that you're no longer in California, because when we spoke in the first show, you lived in California in one of the places that you had investigated thoroughly, and you had such great stories, was about the Queen Mary over in Long Beach. And I wanted you to continue because of what you told me. What's the fate of the Queen Mary right now?
Right now, she's unfortunately in pretty bad shape. They did have to close her for COVID. She was, of course, a working hotel, but the intent was that they were going to go ahead and start to do some repairs on her. So they were doing some basically cosmetic repairs to upgrade her. But the problem was that she's almost 90 years old, almost 100 when you put it into that context. She was built in the 30s. So it's really, she's been sitting in Long Beach Harbor since 1968. And so she's been there for a while. And
50-something years.
Yeah, exactly. So she's been sitting in this enclosure that they made for her, but she is free floating. Now, like I said, before the closure, they were doing some cosmetics. Now, I had special carte blanche, shall we say, because I've been aboard so many times, and I also worked very closely with the company. And that was working, that basically operated her. So there were places on the ship that I got to go to that no one else got to. But in addition to that, I did grow up out there. When I was 10 years old, my dad transferred out to Southern California to Long Beach. So I'd always had a definitive love for ocean liners. And I used to sneak aboard the ship and investigate. And I had heard stories about the ghosts and being a ghost ship. But at that time, it was not popular to have
not like now. Yeah,
exactly. So you kind of had to keep hush hush about it. And I don't remember if I told you the story or not of being in the back area of the ship. And
no, but keep going. I want to hear this.
Yeah, I was crawling through the back areas and areas. In fact, I went all the way to the back part of the ship where the rudder control was, and it was nothing but rust. And I came out of that, and so I kind of brushed myself off, and I was walking around a corridor, and there was a man standing there. And I went, oh crap, I'm in trouble. They
I'm
caught me.
busted. I'm
14 years
busted.
old.
Of
Well,
course.
I also used to sneak aboard without paying because I knew the back ways into the ship. And so I thought, oh crap, they caught me. So this gentleman looked at me really odd, and I kind of brushed off a little bit more rust. And he went ahead and asked me, what are you, or I asked him, what, no, he asked me, what are you doing here? And I said, well, what are you doing here? And
that's that's a typical teenager reply, by the way.
and he says, well, I asked you first. And I said, very sheepishly, I said, well, I'm ghost hunting. And his face lit up. He said, so am I. Well, that gentleman was Peter James. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Peter
Yes,
James.
of course I've heard of Peter James.
He really was involved with a
Yes.
lot of the paranormal activity aboard the Queen Mary, and the nicest guy in the world. And he actually became like a mentor to me. He would take me on trips into the ship and have him work with him and so on. But during that whole period of time, you know, I was studying more and more about the paranormal world because it just seemed to be a part of me. But getting back to the situation with the Queen Mary, after they did close her, they did discover several areas of structural damage, and they were shocked by the amount, and they're fearful, still are fearful that she may even capsize in the harbor.
In other words, it's not safe to.
Exactly. Nobody should be on there at this point unless it's like fire crews and so on. But which is heartbreaking because for so many years the city has always owned the Queen Mary, but they lease it out to private groups. The only time, and had the city not kind of not playing so nice, there's other ways I would have phrased it, Disney wanted to buy it. And create another marine park. And use Mary as the center stage.
Sure.
But they declined and came out of the project. So retained under the city. But then other industries came in, and they promised the city would grant them X amount of money if they would go ahead and do the work to maintain, number one, and to repair, number two, any of the issues with the Queen Mary. A lot of that money went missing. A lot of that money.
And let's face it, anything that sits in salt water and is that age, you know that it's going to be costly.
Absolutely. So it's, even when I'd go down into the boiler room, which was absolutely humongous, they had taken out the boilers when they brought her over from England. And, but I mean, it was just a cavernous area. And but you could see the damage even back then, and that was
many years ago. Right, and you were, and this was for your untrained eyes, so for somebody that was,
So, but I mean, if it's that obvious to somebody like me, a maritime expert is going to go in there, especially a structural engineer. They're going to go, what the heck? And that's basically what just recently happened. When they closed the doors to the hotel, they brought in experts to make sure that she was
probably, they said, oh, we'll use this time wisely.
Right. And then they realized that to get her safe, it would cost over $20 million.
Yeah. And that's probably just like to be able to open the doors, if that. Exactly.
And the ironic thing about it, back in '68, the city only paid $6.8 million for the Queen Mary.
It's incredible.
And so you can see where economics has led.
Sure.
But that is just to make sure that he doesn't sink. On
Right.
top
Of
of
course,
that,
yeah.
there's still another additional $20 million worth of repairs
And can you
that
imagine
need to
if a
be
boat
done.
like that capsizes? Oh my God.
Uh, it'd be really heartbreaking, number one, and
Yeah.
they would more than likely have to scrap her.
Oh, of
And
course, but even the
there,
cost of that has got to be astronomical.
oh, well, and the loss to history.
Yes,
She
yes,
is the
yes,
last great liner left.
yes.
And I mean, yeah, we've got the newer ones and so on, but everything aboard that ship is as it was in the
Mm-hmm.
30s, 40s, and 50s.
Yeah, and it's
The
got a
art
lot of
definitely
history.
gorgeous. It is. It's a piece of history that definitely needs to be taken care of. But the thing too is, as they were going through, the structural engineers, they found rooms and things like that that hadn't been opened since '68. So they were
Really,
time capsules and
that
machinery
is so
rooms
interesting.
and things. So I mean, there's the Queen Mary has a lot of mysteries
Yeah.
and a lot of paranormal activity. I mean,
Oh,
she
no, no,
is
no. But I
definitely
think that's so interesting because you know what? People sometimes assume when they see, for example, shows that they've done that that ship has been investigated from, what was it, everywhere. And what you just said, that there's many probably staterooms or cabins that it was like, we're
Mhm.
not going to open it up. We're only going to use this portion
Right.
and just leave them sealed.
Yeah.
And like you said, time goes by and there you go. It's incredible what you might find
It
in
is.
there.
Well, even like I said, when I was young, I'd go into places that I shouldn't. And I remember going into the old theater. Now, they had not opened that old theater up for
Uh-huh.
God only knows how long. But the thing was, there were old movie posters that were
Wow.
still intact. And
Mm-hmm.
you think that, wow. And you literally step back in time when you're
Yes.
walking these desks. Uh, it does have a presence to it. And the one thing about the Queen Mary, I have spoken about this on several occasions, and people have kind of confirmed it that worked on her. I believe that with all the energy that's been imprinted on her from deaths, from activities, she was involved in the war.
Mm-hmm.
She had a mishap with her escort, the Curacao, which was a
Mm-hmm.
destroyer escort. They called her the Gray Ghost
Right.
because they had,
I heard that. That
which
was
is
during wartime,
ironic.
right?
Yeah, that was when she was a troop carrier. She carried more troops than in one run than which helped speed up the war in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was astronomical. It was standing room only on the ship, but she was ordered never to stop because of the amount of troops. Well, her escort destroyer cut in front of her, and the Queen Mary, being faster than the Curacao, sliced her right in half,
Oh,
and the entire crew perished.
oh
The
my
ship
gosh.
itself sank within 10 minutes,
Sure.
but they could not stop. And so all of those people literally died. So you've got that kind of energy.
Yes.
And so with that, but where I was going with this, when you walk aboard her, you
Mm-hmm.
get the feeling that she's alive. Maybe not sentient, but
Right.
definitely alive.
So
And
much, so many things that people, because everybody hears sometimes the famous stories or the well told, but you know how much drama played out there
oh gosh,
that
countless good
people have
times,
no
bad.
idea?
Well, and I think that has a lot to do with the hauntings, to be
Yes.
honest with you,
Yes.
because it was, when you look at one end of it, you've got the sadness of the deaths that occurred.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you've got all the joy that was
Sure.
there. And I've always said, if you're a spirit and you decide to stay earthbound, would you want to
Mm-hmm.
linger in a graveyard where your body is and reminisce, or would you rather go to a place that you
And hang
love
out.
and hang out with
Yeah.
possibly other people that you knew? Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's one of those that I really feel that to happen. And it's she's a very odd ship, like I said. One time I stayed aboard her, and there was hardly anybody staying on board the ship, but it was so active. You'd see
Okay.
shadows under your door, but you wouldn't hear footsteps.
Okay.
You'd have water, and I was filming one night. I think the night before I and my son left, and I was going down the hallway, and I had my camcorder up, and I'm just kind of watching where I walked instead of really looking through the viewfinder.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got home, I was amazed at everything that was on that video.
Okay.
And there was one in particular shot that I had. Now, when you're walking the corridors of the Queen Mary, they slant kind of like in a bow,
Okay.
because that's how ships are made. And so I was walking down. I had the camera going. I was headed to the secondary stairwell to go up to the boat deck. And as I walked, I didn't see anything. I just kept filming. Well, when I reviewed the tape, at the very end of the hallway, you see this little girl. And now I didn't see her. Like I said, I ran into nobody when I
Okay.
was doing this, not a living soul, shall we
Mm-hmm.
say.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, this little girl starts walking towards me. The only problem was she didn't have any legs.
All right. What did you do, Chris?
Well, I mean, it's like in the paranormal field, you really don't get scared until you
Till
review the
afterwards.
evidence. Yeah, and it was like, holy, you know
Yeah.
what? And
Yeah.
I assumed it was Jackie. Now,
Okay.
remember, we were talking about Peter James.
Yes. Yes.
Now, he would audibly talk to little Jackie all the
Okay.
time, and she would respond. And I was thinking maybe it was Jackie. Somehow she recognized me or something.
Mm-hmm.
But before she could get to me, I walked up the steps and up onto the boat deck. Well, the other aspect of it was I wanted to get a panorama shot of her. So I went down into the parking lot, and I was panning back and forth along the ship, and again, not seeing anything. Continuing to review it when I got home, and you see all these people up on the boat deck.
Wow.
And there was even a dog sitting on a bench.
That's incredible.
Looked like a German Shepherd. So she is so filled. And they do estimate that there could be up to 800 to 1,500 spirits on board.
Yeah. So then what do you think would happen if for some reason they decide not to rescue her? What happens to those spirits? Because a lot of people always.
Well, and this goes back to like when you tear down an alleged haunted house, where
Right.
do they go? And does the land continue to be haunted? Kind of
Right.
like with the Titanic. What's to say that, and there have been investigations in the artifacts and it has activity. So do they remain with any part of that, an attachment, so to speak?
Right. And you know what? You beat me to my next question, because I'm sure you've heard of that story that was circulating about that Eastern Airlines jet, the one that went down in the Everglades, and they took some of the parts and they used them, and then they started various really credible witnesses having of the pilots that died.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, if they decide, well, you know what, it's too costly to salvage her, we'll sell what we can. And then it makes you wonder, is that going to happen if whoever gets any piece of her gets a little extra to go with it?
Right. And it very well could happen. I mean, how many times have we encountered something that has an attachment? To be honest with you, I sometimes hate to go into antique stores.
Oh my God, yes. I tell everybody, you better be ready. I tell everybody, the people leave things on the curb many times just trying to be generous. It's like, take it, And sometimes I tell people, if you ever get if you get a wonky feeling off of something, sometimes it's better just to leave it, because you don't know, that might be all of somebody that passed away in the house and it's in good shape, and the family is just leaving it out for, somebody else to use, but whoever it belonged to is thinking, hey, that's mine. Wait, hold on.
Yeah, exactly. And they can get downright angry if you try to do something with their things. I mean, it'd be like us. Wait, I love that. How can you be taking that? We sometimes forget that spirits were people too. And they're going to have the same convictions that you and I have when it comes to personal belongings or our living environment or whatever. And
you know what? It's and I'm going to interject this real quick, Chris, based on what you're just right now, what you're saying. And earlier, and I mean, my audience knows that I moved a few months ago, and we were talking about how much crap we have and how much stuff we want to bring with us. And believe it or not, while I was in the middle of this, that I realized, man, there's so much of the stuff that I really don't need. I said, you know what? This is probably what happens to people that pass away and become attached to certain items. That you think, wow, that's so weird. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm doing it. Where you all of a sudden you want, this. And I'm thinking, now it gives a better understanding, these people that you say, hey, they built the house or they lived there 20, 30, 40 years. Or in that case of the item, it was like, man, this is for you to understand that sometimes just because you transition into basically you're a ghost or whatever you want to call it, that you do, this is your thing, whatever that thing is. And it's our nature. And then by this, I'm not a hoarder, because some people say, are you hoarding? No, I'm not a hoarder. But I'm saying, I think as humans, there's a part of us that likes the familiarity of certain objects that either they're just, it's like, hey, this has been with me a long time, or I've got good memories. And I can very easily see where in the case of the Queen Mary or what we were talking about, that some of that stuff is going to be maybe have a special tie into some type of discarnate that's there.
Well, and you see how collectible, especially Queen Mary, since like I said, she's the last of her kind. Yes. And you go on to eBay, you can find things from the Queen Mary from her heyday. But again, if God forbid anything should happen to that ship, that psychic energy has got to go somewhere. And
well, even what you said, I can just imagine. I'm going to put on my I'm just making money hat, some investor that says, hey, you know what? I bet you that if all these cabins that we were talking about that haven't been opened, that are like very accurate description, time capsules, you know how much money we could get for some of this memorabilia? And it's like, I could see where the, you know how sometimes people sell stuff on eBay and places like that because supposedly it's haunted. And I have a feeling that if something like that happened with any of the stuff from the Queen Mary, it's like, don't advertise it, but there's a good chance you're going to get something that comes along with the article.
Well, I'll give you a little story of something that will probably amaze you. It's not very well known, but enough years have already passed. When they were filming Titanic down in Rosarito, Mexico, they were having problems. And they were almost having poltergeist activity.
Really?
Now, this was nothing more than a facade. But Cameron, when he made that movie, did it so accurately, right down to the silverware. That it was the Titanic reincarnated in many ways. But they actually contacted us at that time and asked us to come down and find out, was it their imagination, was it structural, was it something, somebody playing jokes. Well, we more or less assumed, since they went ahead and recreated that ship for that movie in such detail and such a tragedy of death, that somehow or another the spirits that were involved with the sinking of the Titanic somehow migrated to that location. And that is one of the reasons why, instead of keeping it as is, like for basically a showman's sport, because it was at that time the highest grossing movie, they completely destroyed it. They
The
tore it
set?
down to pieces.
They did? That's
Yeah.
incredible, because you hear about all these great sets, how later on other movies, they use them because it's like, it's such a great set.
Yeah.
They destroyed it?
They completely destroyed it. And they dumped it into a refuse facility near the town. And
That's
actually,
incredible.
people would go out and retrieve pieces from the set. And but that is something that was pretty much unheard of at that time. Now, how can this facility be haunted? They created that movie area, that studio area, from a vacant beach.
Really?
And they built it up from that. It was purposely built for the movie Titanic. And now all of a sudden,
too good, too perfect of an imitation.
Exactly. So do spirits migrate to something similar or connected to, which could very well happen with the Queen Mary, just like we were saying.
And you know what? I'm going to, this is, believe it or not, this story that you told me, I've never forgotten it. It's one of my favorite stories of ghosts. And I remember you mentioned to me that one of the times you saw, because, the Queen Mary is known for certain ghosts that, like you said, Jackie and others. But I remember you told me something about seeing a man in a zoot suit.
Yes, yes.
And I have never forgotten that, because I said, you know what, this is such a great story, because people sometimes think that the only ghosts or spirits or whatever that in a place are the ones that were there. And sometimes you do have it the other way around. You get them from somewhere else that say, hey, man, this is great. This is full of, I got a lot of company, because that's such an unusual sighting. And so, how can I say, the time period when zoot suits were being used?
Right, right. And even when you think about it, a zoot suit on a transatlantic travel, you're thinking kind of like 20s and flappers and things like that. Men in tuxedos and so forth. And but there again, it's time. It's frustrating to a parapsychologist like me, because I'm always looking at the science before getting to that little chunk, golden nugget of paranormal. And you're thinking, all right, I'm looking at this guy. He's in a zoot suit.
What's he doing there?
What the heck is he doing here? It doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And and that's one of the things too, that so many people have run into individuals on the Queen Mary that they thought they were reenactors.
Isn't that crazy when they're so solid that people think they're real?
And they'll converse with them, and then you find, and that happened to me. And I don't know if I told you this part of the story.
Go ahead.
This was still at the same time that I was filming. I got to film with Jackie. And I and my son at that time went out there, and he'd never seen California, so I wanted him to see the Queen Mary, because it was such a big part of my life. And so the thing is, we got in there about 11 o'clock at night, and we had already. I had moved, and so it took us a little time to drive out. And so we got there at 11 o'clock. So went ahead and started to check in. And there was the bellman who was standing at the podium, and really nice guy, really, really nice guy. And I kind of was asking him some questions under the cuff, have you ever seen anything strange? And I knew that they had closed off the swimming pool. And so he says, well, if I didn't tell you to go down the hallway, and if I didn't tell you to use the last door and open it, and if I didn't tell you to walk down 3 flights of stairs, and if I didn't tell you then go to your left and go through that door, then I wouldn't have told you that that's for the swimming pool.
Yeah.
So we kind of laughed about it and so on. And so he brought up our luggage, and so sure enough, and that was a weird thing too, because we went ahead, followed his directions, got into the swimming pool area, and the door that we used was unlocked, so that was the only door there. And so we're looking around. In fact, the funny thing about it is I came across a security video of,
Really?
of us sneaking around in the pool
you're
area.
kidding.
And I went, oh my gosh,
go.
and there I am, and I'm sneaking around
That's
in the
funny.
pool area with my boy.
That's
And but so anyway, then we're leaving, and the door had locked.
Oh,
And
God.
I went, oh no, we're locked in here. And I thought, oh boy, we're going to get thrown in jail or some horrible thing. And it was, I was picking up on all sorts of things. I mean, that pool really is something else. And so I heard a click at the other end, and we went up to find it, and there was a door that was partially open. So, and it was a different door. So whoever it was in there opened the door to let us out. So getting back to the story about the bellman. So we went ahead next day, and we're checking out, and I started talking to the 2 bellmen there. And I said, would you please tell the nice gentleman that was working last night, thank you very much. He was very helpful in, giving us some history on the Queen Mary. And they said, oh, well, can you describe him to us so we know which person it is? And so I proceeded to start to describe this individual. And the 2 bellmen look at each other, and they got this really puzzled look on their faces. And they said, sir, we don't have anybody that looks like that. And I said, oh, good joke. Yeah. He says, no. Yeah. And we both have worked here for 10 years.
Oh, wow. So they knew everybody there.
They knew everybody. So who was the bellman?
That's incredible.
And it even to this day, it kind of gives me the shivers, because even his uniform was different than what they were wearing. It was.
You know what? You know that thing you see what you expect to see.
Yeah.
So it's like
exactly.
That is such a great story, Chris.
The Queen Mary, I love the Queen Mary dearly, and it's again very, very sad to hear. It's like your grandma; you hate to see her get old, and that's how I feel about the Queen Mary. She's a beautiful ship, and to see her not being taken care of, and thank God I'm not the only one, because there are private groups that are really trying to find the money to get her back into shape and maintain that. Because I would recommend, if people don't mind things that go bump in the night and so on, definitely take advantage. You want a real paranormal experience? When she opens up, take a trip out to the Queen Mary. You can go to the Stanley Hotel. You can go to all these other notoriously haunted locations, but you also hear, oh, nothing ever happened to me. Believe me, you will not. Every time I was aboard that ship, there was always something.
That's one thing I've heard, that over there, it's not like, well, if you're lucky, you might have something minimal if you're lucky. And from what I've heard of the Queen Mary, just about everybody had something that they couldn't explain. If it wasn't, I know some people had an actual sighting, but others were like, weird stuff happened, like really weird stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it falls into that category, like I said. you really, I would rather have those souls that had enjoyed life aboard the Queen Mary there than
Hmm.
have her be in bits and pieces
Sure.
like the Titanic.
I'm
And
hoping that
it's,
they're going to rescue her, and some investor or investors are going to come along and see the potential there. It's like, okay, we'll invest in making her safe, and then let me tell you something. That sounds like I could see where so much money could be made from her. You know, beyond what's I'm sure they've made so far. But of
yeah.
course, I'm not a I don't know about that as far as the that industry. But you would think that that's a it's a great draw. I really do hope, based on what you're telling me, that they do something to salvage her, even if it's little by little, or keep her afloat.
Oh, well, I
But
agree.
Chris, you also
So,
said, and which is, my audience will find out, like I found out, that you moved away from California, and now you're in Colorado.
yeah.
And then you had started telling me that, which, by the way, I know because of other some of the articles I've written and blogs and stuff, that Colorado also has a very haunted history.
Oh, very much so. All across the spectrum for paranormal activity, I think Colorado is one of the leaders. You have
Hmm.
a high amount of UFO sightings. You have cryptid sightings. You have
Yes.
hauntings in general. And in fact, with our organization, Anubis Paranormal Research Organization, or APRO as we call it, uh, for the first time. Now, when I was a ranger, the way this all came about was every time I would go to a park and work in a park, a lot of them were historical parks.
Hmm.
And so they found out that I had a definitive interest in the paranormal. So they,
Okay.
when something would happen, they would ask me to go in and check it out. And
Hmm.
so I would start a chapter of APRO at that particular area. So we've got one in Los Angeles or Long Beach, and
Hmm.
then we have one in Austin, Texas, one down in Fort Lauderdale, which was down by your neighborhood,
Yes.
one in Omaha. But when I came back to Colorado, we actually created two chapters, one here on the west end, which is Grand Junction, and Denver. So we split the Rocky Mountains, you know, one would take
Hmm.
one side and they would take the other because of the amount of activity. And it's even when I was in the Park Service, I was always called in to investigate. My reputation had kind of gotten off the ground. Oh, you've got something weird, call this Ranger. In fact, I was starting to be called Ranger Mulder uh, as my nickname because I would go in and investigate very
Okay.
odd, like the missing 411.
Yes.
I've been a part of that. Other cryptid sightings that they couldn't explain, very strange UFO phenomena, and so forth. But yes, I decided now in my years to come back to Colorado and work
Hmm.
out of this location. But we're even getting interest of starting a chapter in England.
Okay.
Quite a few after the pandemic rises. We've
Hmm.
got a few people, so we're becoming quite a renowned agency or organization, I should say, and I'm very proud of that. But
Wow.
at the same time, we're the only thing that we would do probably differently than most is we look at the science first. Always try and find an
Sure.
answer before, like I said, you get to that little nugget of gold. But because in most cases you can find an explanation as to why or what. Now, every now and then, even with myself, you kind of go, "What is going on?" You
Exactly.
scratch your
Exactly.
head,
And I tell everybody,
and
being a paranormal investigator, sometimes your threshold, you're a skeptic, and the threshold is very high for you to actually say there's something here, because
yeah,
people think sometimes paranormal investigators just believe everything. Oh, it's not. That's not
right.
the case at all.
And there have been some that
Oh yeah, I'm
jump to that.
sure.
And
Hmm.
I'm not bad mouthing any group,
I
but
know what you mean, but
I will bad mouth those groups that go in that don't know what they're doing.
sure.
that's dangerous. I mean, extremely dangerous, not only to them psychologically, but also physically. A couple of years back, there was a couple that were doing it more as a hobby, and they had earphones on, and they were on a railroad trestle.
I know.
They
Yeah, I
didn't
heard
hear the
about
train
that.
come, and they were killed.
Yeah.
And so the psychological effect.
Wasn't that, I believe that, if I remember correctly, I think, you know, it was in that area, you know, the legend of the goat man, that there's supposedly the goat man is seen close to the trestles of the, probably they were out
Yeah.
there, these legend trippers. And
Yes.
people don't realize, people think, well, how could you not hear the train coming? People don't realize that by the time you hear it, the train is on top of you.
Well, exactly. There is a very finite time frame to get out of a train's way. And if you're in the middle of this thing and it's 700, 800 yards to the end, you're never going to make it unless you jump. And,
Sure.
But if you got earphones on and you're focused, you're going to miss it.
Yes.
And so again, you should always have somebody being an observer. You should always have somebody. I've never believed in an investigation where there was a single individual going out or doing, oh, you go over here, Tommy, you go over here, you know, Becky,
Right.
you go over there. Always two. One to watch, to make sure you don't trip over and break your neck, and also a credible witness to what you may have witnessed. And but again, there's the hobbyists. And then there is the specialist. I will not say the professional, because you cannot be a professional in this, because there's so many unanswered questions. How could you be?
Sure.
But there are experienced teams.
Yes.
And those, I would say our group is an experienced team. We've got really good people. I've got about 60 total investigators across the board, and they're very dedicated at what they do.
Yes, and you know what? And it requires, I think a lot of people don't realize, because they get misled by the reality shows, that you have to have a lot of patience also.
Oh, absolutely. What you see on television in 45 minutes is not what you
Right, exactly.
Believe
they
me, I follow
condense it, you know, they cut out, they've got production crews in the back that do all the boring stuff, you know, what you call it.
Right.
So yeah, and a lot of people, and I tell people, you know, sometimes, because I've had questions like, oh, they want to join a paranormal team. And I said, well, number one, look for somebody that's been around for a while. And, you know, and I said, because most teams, sometimes they dissolve very shortly, like within the first 2 years, because when they realize that when they go on these investigations, hey, it's not like I saw on that show. Sometimes you're like, you know, it's like,
that has happened with me. I'm just as guilty. I'd be sitting there. You're in the dark. You're sitting waiting for Tommy the ghost to come in and speak to you, and you nod off. You
right,
been up
or your client, because they work Monday through Friday, will only give you, let's say we're talking here at Residence, will only give you access, or if it's a restaurant, after hours on a weekend. You tell some of these, by the way, on the weekend, you mean the weekend that I thought, that's what investigation calls for, because if it's a private residence, families don't let you there till it's the weekend. You know, maybe they want to get their kids out of the house, if that's the case, or if it's a restaurant, hey, we'll close down for one night so you can. And let me tell you something, the love affair with becoming a paranormal investigator takes up. They just like, I didn't know it was like this. So I've told people, I said, you know, look for a group that's been around for a while, to, you know, because that usually is the first thing you're looking for, that they've gelled.
Yes. And that's what a good team is. One that you know and can work with. There's a lot, and unfortunately, para-unity.
Right.
I would love to see para-unity, but it's never going to happen.
I think too many egos in the way.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, it is. Yeah, I know.
And it's a shame, because there have been a few of us that have really tried to create an organization made up of different groups in order to put in evidence, you know, a depot of actual credible scientific evidence that could be researched, that could be looked at, and nobody wants to share anything. And
Right. It becomes it's how can I say, ownership, or what, I don't know if you want to call it that or whatever. Yeah, I understand exactly what you mean. It's the sensationalism overrides anything else versus, hey, let's do some research, some legit research.
well, and I think too, another big problem is our TV shows that we have out there.
Yes.
Not naming
I know
who they are, but there are
Mhm.
two big ones, and I'm sure you know which ones I'm talking about.
Yes.
One went away and is now back.
Mhm.
But if you started watching either of those shows, they started from the most humblest beginnings.
Yes.
Their equipment was minute at best.
Mhm.
They didn't have flashy vehicles. Well, now they have buses and vehicles and equipment,
It's like,
and
yeah,
they're
I know. It's like
making,
you've got a caravan of
yeah,
stuff.
and
And
they're
that's if
making
you see it.
money.
A lot of times, a lot of that
Oh,
is behind the scenes as far as how much equipment is actually transported and set up. And personally, I think that a lot of times what ends up happening is that some of the stuff, for lack of a better word, is more for show than for actual research. And it takes away from the actual investigation.
yeah.
So
Well, I always say I would never pull up with marked vehicles in an
no,
investigation, especially a private
I love it.
investigation.
I love
Like
that
that,
you're bringing that up, Chris.
because
Because
every
only people
neighbor
that
in the neighborhoods go, look over there, look, they're
yes,
ghost
I
ghostbusters are over, and that's going to
right.
cause more trauma to that
Yes.
individual who really has a problem. So you don't want to
That
draw
I am
attention to
so
that.
glad you're pointing that out, because I said, contrary to what you think, because you see this in the shows, a good
Yeah,
portion of the private clients that contact you, the last thing they want is for you to drive up, just like what you said, have a boatload of people spill out in equipment, and hey, bring the camera. And, and the neighbors are like, huh? You know, they're like, no, 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 don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, because they're wigged out as it is, and maybe you might have been the last. It's like, I don't know what else to think of. Please help me.
yeah.
But they don't
Well,
want
it's
anybody, especially their next door neighbors.
oh Lord, no. But it also works on the opposite side of the coin.
Oh yeah, I know,
I and my
I know.
team have gone up, knocked
Yeah,
on the door. I've got a few members of my team with me because we do preliminary interviews, almost
sure,
to the
yeah.
point
Mm-hmm.
where it's a psychological, and then we do a walkthrough, and then we'll actually do an investigation. So this one particular time we showed up, and one of my guys had a camera, and then I had my assistant with me, and knock on the door. Door opens up. I introduce myself and my team members. And all of this time, the couple that own the property keep kind of looking over my shoulder. And it's like, why aren't you looking at me in the face?
I got the ghost
And
behind me.
yeah, and so, well, no, what was ironic
I know,
about
I
it,
know. And you must, because I know where you're going with this. But keep going. This
they,
is great. This is great. This is, by the way, whoever's listening to this, this is the real paranormal research what he's describing right here.
so they're looking, and I said, is there a problem? And they said, well, where's the cameras?
There
And
you
I
go.
said, well, I've got my cameraman right here. No, the film crew. And I says, we don't have a film crew. And they slammed
I
the door in my face.
yes.
So sometimes you just look at each other and just shake your head, because there's those that do want the publicity
Oh, let me
and
tell you
think they're
something.
going to get something out of it.
One time I went to an investigation, and it was this was in South Florida. I want to say it was like up in West Palm Beach. Anyway, it was the family lived in it's one of these new neighborhoods, nice new neighborhood. It was a brand new house. The family, especially the wife, is saying how they're getting messages and stuff being written like in soap or foam on the bathroom mirrors. And there had been somebody had gone in, and I kind of filled in for some, like, hey, we're ready to go to the next step. And I went in with a photographer because we wanted just to go in there and take, talk, have another set of people talk to the lady,
Right.
and take some pictures, and of course she's showing us where she had these messages written on the mirrors and this and that, and we're like, and all this time I'm like, man, I after a while, and I'm sure you understand, Chris, sometimes there's something that there's something here.
Oh yes.
Sometimes you
Oh
get
yes.
it's like I don't need a piece of equipment to tell me, that I call it the ting-a-ling-a-ling. It's like,
Right.
all right, but I'm like, man, but at the same time, I know sometimes supernatural is not on demand. You go, there's no ting-a-ling-a-ling because the ghost is gone and hid up in the attic because hey, it's like, but anyway, I'm like, okay. Bottom line, she goes, oh, I want to show you some pictures. I said, great. What pictures do you want to show me? This, by the way, folks, this is before digitals. This is when people would develop. You remember when people would get red eye, when people would snap
Yes.
pictures of red eye?
Oh,
Finally, I
absolutely.
caught on that she's trying to say how she's kind of psychic, and she's showing me pictures of herself. When people look up and you have the red eye, when you look at it, it's kind of scary looking, but it's the reflection of the flash. She's showing me these pictures of herself with red eye. And I'm like looking at the picture. She goes, yeah, that's me looking up and see how my eyes are. And I'm like, yeah, but that's red eye. That's from the flash. Bottom line, make a long story short, she's trying to propel this thing around to where there's a haunting, and she's a psychic, but she's also getting possessed. And then that's why she has these red glinting eyes when she's taking the photograph. And I'm like, what? It was like, oh, this is very, and then, my grandmother, she used to be all of a sudden and from the old country. And I was like, that's great. But just because you get red eye in the camera, in a picture, doesn't mean you're on the verge of being possessed. It was like one of those things, like I looked at the photographer and he looked at me, and he was an investigator. He was on the team, but his thing was he had some really nice equipment, cameras, 35 millimeters, again, before digital. And you can tell me and him doing one of, because we had worked before. We looked at each other like, yeah, it's like, got to leave now. And yeah, it was something along those lines where the intent of bringing in investigators is not really to investigate. It's to serve the purpose of whatever it is. Like what you said, they're looking for the cameras. And it's like, okay, this is a waste of time. Even if there might have been something there. It was like, man, your credibility just went. Psh.
Exactly. And that's one of the, I hate to say it, they kind of think you're like stupid or something.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to do what we do. And we learn a lot about the psychology of certain people. And if you're getting red flags, then you know that this is not a legitimate situation. And you are absolutely correct when saying about walking into a place, I was going to say the hairs on the
there's something that just like,
in my case.
Yeah, right. No, but I know everybody's got, but after a while you learn what know. It's like, okay, this is not because their AC's down low. There's something here. It's you learn to trust it, but that only comes, I think, with field experience. After you go after investigation, after investigation, after investigation, and after a while you realize this is like, okay. And then there's some that just when you're coming up to the place, you're already like, okay. Yeah, whatever's here is either they're checking us out as soon as you get out of your vehicle.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and I think we become more sensitive.
Yeah, you do. You fine tune it. You fine tune it.
Exactly.
Fine tune it. And but I tell everybody, for all those would-be paranormal investigators, reading a book doesn't cut it. Eventually, you have to go out there and do the field work. You have to go on boring investigations that you're like, oh my God. And that's how you basically really truly learn how to do paranormal research. Because then you come across the situations where you're like, holy, what?
Yeah. And I think it's part of the problem why so many groups fail is because it takes, like I said, special people like you and I and quite a few others, but there's something about us that
Yeah.
is in tune with the paranormal world.
Yes.
And I started having incidences when I was 8 years old.
Right.
And it has followed me all my life. So it's a part of my
Right.
life. And ironically, that's what I would always say about my park ranger work is I walk on a fence. I can do police forensics and
Mm-hmm.
investigation with my law enforcement training. And
Right.
then I can switch modes and go into the parapsychologist mode.
Yes, exactly.
And
One's not exclusive of the other, because you also get the people that think, oh, you're into that, oh, you're a real woo woo, you're not, you can't be analytical, you don't, which is what they think of as research. You're going to look at everything and you're going to take it at face value, and it's like, not really. Believe it or not, my standards are really high, and if some type of proof is questionable, it might even be real, but for me, if it's questionable, it's like, okay, we're not going to use it because that's not clear-cut evidence. Whether it's an EVP or a photograph or whatever it is, we're going to, if it doesn't pass this threshold, then it cannot be used.
Well, you look at some of the things that are like on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what do you guys see here? And
I'm sorry. Go ahead, because I know you're going.
It's always a blurry picture, and it's like, I think a tree, but they want you to see things that aren't there, of course.
Yes.
Matrixing and the whole 9 yards. Or it's like with the EVPs. I always love when they're doing an EVP and then they tell you what it says or what they assume it says, and then you hear it. It's leading. It's too leading, and
it's like,
we can't.
Yeah, don't you see the woman's face in the curtain?
Yes. Or every orb is a ghost.
Yeah, exactly. Did you see the eyes inside the orb? No. Yeah. Like, well, now I do.
Yeah, there's a face in there. Or the ones that taken a picture in the rain and go, look at all the orbs. And I'm going, holy cow, and these people are believing this.
Let me tell you something. I tell people, I hate to say, once upon a time, orbs were considered, and I'm not discounting it, but right now, as far as anybody that's in this field, orbs are like zero when it comes to any type of paranormal proof. Sorry. I think that it was overused, and they forget it. Could be so many things, dust particles, you name it. It's like, and it's really funny because when you look at some of these older shows from the 1990s, there's orbs, and they like, and now you realize, like, oh yeah, okay, not anymore. Or they overused it, and they forgot to include how many things produce that on a film or in a photograph. But yes, I have to laugh when you were gonna say that thing about the that people, they tell you that the EVP, did you hear it says get out, and you're like, did?
I thought it said when's lunch. I don't know what's going on.
It says get out. Yeah, I know. That's one of these things is like,
it's just
or class. This is a class A EVP. Okay, let's hear it.
You can't argue with, because it's very distinctive, a class A.
Yes.
But you got a class C, and you're absolutely blah, 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 blah.
But you got to call it a class C. You can't call it a class A. Okay, when you have to tell somebody what it says, it's not a class A. It's not. People can differentiate a little bit, but they should hear it without you telling what it is, and you kind of realize, that is exactly what I heard. Okay, but yeah, that's a whole different. But let me ask you something, Chris. That thing about Colorado, one of the things I noticed, because I did a book about 3 or 4 years ago about about the Old West, and part of the things that I looked at was a lot of these mining camps, and a lot in Colorado at Cripple Creek, and people don't realize that. Because everybody thinks of, the 1849 gold rush out to California, but they don't realize that there was a lot of gold camps, those all over Colorado. And the reason why I bring this up is that whenever you would have these mining camps and then the towns, there was a lot of violence and claim jumping and the recipe for intelligent hauntings.
Well, ironically, you should say that, because when I told you that I got started at an early age, I was born in Texas, and my dad, he was in the railroad and mining industry, so they built train trestles through these different areas. He was stationed in Leadville. They moved him to Leadville, and
Okay.
if a lot of people may associate that with Molly Brown because that's where
Mm-hmm.
Molly and JJ had their mine. But
Mm-hmm.
Leadville is the highest incorporated city in the United States at 10,400 feet. And so it's
Wow.
pretty much up there. But when I was little, like I said, I probably was about 7 or 8 at the time. One evening, it was about maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up and I saw whom I thought was my father standing in my doorway. And he was a big, burly man, but I couldn't see any details. He was just black. And again, being that age, I didn't think anything of it. And so I kept talking to him, no response. And I said, "Boo, Daddy, boo." And then he finally walked off. And so I thought he was going back to the bedroom. Next morning, I said, "Daddy, why didn't you talk to me last night when you were standing in the door?" He says, "I wasn't standing in your doorway." And I proceeded to tell him, and he says, "Oh, you were just dreaming." And the next night, the individual was back again, but this time with another person, a much thinner person. And they just stared at me.
Oh.
We lived right up against an old mine.
Oh.
And so years later, I kind of put 2 and 2 together, and they were probably dead miners because, of course, back in the 1800s, and all that area where we lived was spotted and with old mines from the 1800s. And
Yeah, because I was about
Leadville,
to ask you, did you know the history of the house? But now that you
yeah,
mentioned that
not
you
at
were
that
up
time.
against a mine.
Yeah.
Oh.
And so we were literally, there could have been a mine shaft underneath. And there was a lot of strange things that happened during our time living there. And in fact, I always thought it was just a hill when I was little, but it was the tailings that were right there. And they had
Wow.
just made the deals, leveled them off. And, but that was constant. There was always, like I said, something going on in Leadville, and Leadville has so many of the original 1800 buildings and so on. And but I even had now I don't know to this day if I could say it was an abduction,
Okay.
but again, right around that same age, maybe 9 years old, I woke up and I saw blue light out in the front of our house. Well, it was in the hallway. It was really, really bright. And I thought, what is that? And I got up, and we had windows right up in where our kitchen was. And so I went up, and the one thing that makes me know that it wasn't a dream was I put my forehead against the window because it was kind of a drop down to the street. It was like two levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I put my head, and I could feel the ice cold
Wow.
on my forehead. And when I looked down, what I saw was what I thought was a big owl. But in reality, it was maybe 3 or 4 feet. And it just
Hmm.
stared at me. And then all of a sudden, I was blacked out.
And
And
he was on the other side of the window from where you were
he
at?
was down in the street looking up at me
Okay.
in the window. And it was just the thing that got me was the intense black eyes.
Oh.
And then, like I said, I just kind of winked out and then woke up the next morning in my bed. Now, was I dreaming? I could have been,
That's a very unusual
but
dream, though.
it was very, very strange, especially me seeing an owl. And later on, I had heard of other people who were extremely petrified of owls because they subconsciously had, going through regression or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
discovered that they were abductees.
Right. Right.
So our, you know, does our mind try and cope with something
Sure.
that we
Yes, it
can't
does. It
control?
does. We try
And I,
desperately to keep on to our sanity, even if it means
exactly.
making up stories. Yeah.
Now, I never have had anything else like that happen to me, at least not that I'm aware of, but it's something that you never forget. And like I said, it was those piercing black eyes more than anything else. So it's, Colorado is, I used to see things in the night sky when I was little. Now, even here in Grand Junction, I've seen probably my fair share of UFOs. And really,
Mm-hmm.
we are not that far from Skinwalker Ranch.
Really. You
It's
know what?
something that,
You bring that up, and I mean, I've been watching the show, which I think is fascinating. I mean, I had read from before, like from the '90s when the other owner had it. I mean, after the family, the Sherman family had it, and they passed it, and they had a
mhm,
team on there, and I had followed because God, when you read about some of the things that happened there, they're like, is there anything else that can happen here? It's like, you name it, UFOs, cryptids, cattle mutilation. It's like, and now I've been following the show, and it's incredible what they're finding there. And to be honest with you, I personally do like that they have a very scientific approach.
right.
When they're doing whatever they're doing there. Um, and it makes you wonder, is there something maybe in that area when I mean larger, like what you said, Colorado? Let me ask something, Chris, because I know you were you were in parks and in forests or whatever. Did you ever see a correlation between UFOs and parks or things like that? Because it makes me wonder sometimes, even with that 411, where you hear about people going missing, and it's always been an open-ended question: what's happened to these people? You know.
It, it it is. There have been cases that I had been assigned to
Mm-hmm.
that you literally walk up and go, "What the hell happened?" Now, again,
Right.
when you're being trained as a ranger, especially in law enforcement, uh, you learn to look for certain clues.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you one story here as an example.
Sure.
Uh, it was winter, and usually the campgrounds are closed or not in very big use. And there was this one particular family, they had a pretty good RV setup, and they were going to stay a couple of days in the park. So it was probably 2 days after their stay. Uh, they said they had gone outside and there were lights flashing up in the sky, and they had started to watch them,
Okay.
and they were dancing all over and very bright. And the family just didn't know what to think of it, but they kind of got a little scared. And with the exception of the son was fascinated by it. And it was a mother and a father and a daughter, and then the son, the boy. And he was about 15 years old. So they all went back inside telling him, come on, let's get back in. Well, he decided to stay outside for a little bit longer. So finally comes back in and said that the lights had gone off over the horizon, and didn't think anything more about it. Well, the next morning they woke up, and the son, they thought, had not gotten up yet. Finally, the mother went in to get him to serve him breakfast, and he wasn't there. So they started looking around for him, and they saw footprints leading off, and they were concerned. So they went ahead and they got contacted the ranger station, and I was working that day. And so we went out, we started looking around, and they told me about the situation with the dancing lights. And there had been a fresh snowfall that night. So everything was just perfect. No indentations, no footprints, no nothing, except for what looked like the boys leading from the camp out to this meadow. And one of the things that they teach you when you're tracking somebody is when people walk normally and they're not thinking about it, it's just natural aspect of walking. You always go heel to toe, heel to toe. So your indicator is going to be that your heel is going to be much more into that environment, be it mud, be it snow, or even dirt in general. So you're going to have more of an imprint than the toe area. Now, there was only one set of tracks that went out. Now, if he had been trying to do a practical joke or something along those lines and tried to retrace his step, then he would have gone toe to heel, the complete opposite. So the indentations would have been flat, and it was not that at all. It was heel to toe. So we went ahead, but they just disappeared. They just stopped. And it was like, well, what the heck? Your brain starts racing 10 million miles an hour trying to find a logical explanation for what you're looking at. And so we went ahead, we contacted the local sheriff's department to help us do a search and rescue, even though we wouldn't even know what direction you went in if there had been indicators.
And how old was the kid?
He was 15.
He was 15.
So, yeah, so we tore the county up looking to see what could have possibly happened. And I'm doing my thinking, and the road is leading more and more down the paranormal rabbit hole.
Sure.
Because first off, they see strange lights in the sky. Then the next thing, their son is missing. Now, you don't go out and say, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, I'm sorry to say this, but we think your son has been abducted by aliens.
Yeah.
This doesn't go very well with that.
No, I can see how that would be like, okay, get him out of here.
Yeah, so, I mean, again, lock this ranger up. Maybe. But we kept searching. Now, 3 days later, they get a phone call on their cell phone. And they answer it, and it's the boy. And he says, Mom, Dad, I'm at this house, and they're letting me use the phone, but I don't know where I'm at. And so they got on the phone with the owners, found out where the boy was. Well, it turns out he was 60 miles away from the park. Now, the interesting part about it was he thought it was the next morning.
So lost time.
So you look at, again, 2 + 2 kind of leads down that road to an abduction.
Yes. And he couldn't remember. All he remembered was what? Just I got up and
he was in a field.
He was in a
snow field. And he says, I remember walking out in the field. The lights came back, and I could see him through the window of the RV. And so I went out to look at him again, and I wanted to get a better look.
Sure.
So he walks out into this field, and that.
Well, thankfully he was found alive, because you hear a lot of these stories, the ending is not that good. If they're found.
Well, this is, again, one of those situations. Now, Yosemite National Park, is one of the leading areas for missing people. And I've been on other talk shows too that I told these stories about. There's more in the forests and the parks than we know of. And people would probably stop going if they knew the extent of what we do. And the problem is the National Park Service and the federal government do not want it known that we're losing people in the parks.
You know what?
And
And this is the thing, for all these people that have experiences, it's people like yourself that are there continuously, in other words, that this is their job,
right.
that actually come across the genuine lost person. People do get lost without any paranormal or weird stuff, or they want to get lost. I'm sure you've heard of people that are suicidal and they decide to, and then you come across these other ones. Let me ask something, Chris. Just I'm curious because you know how you hear all these things, all these people. Is there any amount of people that go out into these parks and live there, like, in other words, off the grid? And this is the wrong way. I don't mean off the grid, like people that are maybe homeless and they end up living in there.
There are, but normally they will stay close to civilization.
They will?
Primarily
Okay.
because they're looking for food
Mm-hmm.
or trash dumpster,
Right. Okay.
or looking for something. They will do it. You get sometimes the environmentalist or eco warrior that wants to go
Right.
back to the days, but those are very, very far and few in between.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking. I'm talking sometimes people even that might even be suffering, perhaps even from mental illness, and they end up out there and mostly almost like exactly what you're describing, scrounging around. I'm thinking, man, is there like a score of these people out there, and they basically are just living out, like you said, maybe living out of dumpsters, and maybe because they end up doing stuff that they shouldn't, they come across somebody at hiker, you hear these people going out for hikes and then that's it. They're gone.
Oh, there are definitely individuals out there. A big one is the pot growers.
I have heard of that.
And they'll grow on federal land because then their personal assets cannot be taken from them because it's on federal land.
I did not know that.
And
that's
so
a good incentive.
So if they lose their
their farmland, I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I was on one of those raids where we did go ahead and confiscate. I mean, bushels and bushels. Well, the thing is, we have to destroy it, and so you've got these helicopters coming in and dropping. If they're from a distance, then you have to set the stuff on fire. Yes. You've never seen a bunch more happier park rangers in your entire life.
It's like it's all good. Hey, anybody hungry?
Exactly. Who's got the s'mores?
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly.
But it is true. People will try to hide some of their more heinous things in the woods and try to get off the radar.
I had heard up in Northern California what they call that Emerald Triangle, that they said that I had heard, and this is just me, hearing things, and that even some of the people that they would take to work up on these farms, sometimes they disappear themselves because they're transients, or they just end up there and they're out there just to make money. But sometimes these people know there's nobody going to come looking for you if something happens. And they kind of do away with them.
You can. Now, for instance, here's a case that still bothers me to this day. And it was a family that, again, Yosemite is a hotbed for missing people. I think it's the leader right now. It was very active when I was there for about a year. And the thing was that it was a family. They had a little boy with them. And they're walking down the trail. And all talking, parents being the parents and other kids up front, and their little son was tagging along behind them. Well, they were just talking. The mother was just turned around, said something to the little boy, turned back, and then she turned back around again to tell him, why don't you get up here in the front with brothers and sisters? He was gone.
See, those are the stories that you hear that you're like, what is going on?
No sound of a struggle. No signs of a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
He just was not there. He literally disappeared. And with an animal attack, because everybody says, well, that's cougar country. Yeah, but you're going to hear a cougar come, and they're going to make their paws are going to make a thumping sound when they're starting to attack. And of course, they're going to scream, and whoever's being attacked is going to scream.
Sure.
Nothing. And you sometimes never find the end result. It's just in limbo. There was another case, actually.
Well, let me ask you, was that child ever found?
The other children were still up front, but nobody saw anything from that point.
And the child was not found?
He was never found. No, he was never found.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And this is the thing, you do a search anyway. And
right, of course.
And an immediate, a child is an immediate, you call everybody in to try to find it. And you can go and do, well, they call them quad patterns. You'll scope off a section, you'll have a person breast to breast, or I should say side to side, and you'll comb those areas, and then you'll move on to the next. And in a lot of cases, you'll do that, and then a week or 3 days or a couple hours later, you go back, and there's evidence of somebody there.
I've heard of that they're saying there's no way we would have overlooked this.
Exactly.
Through the first walkthrough. There's no way.
And so that happens. Another case, unfortunately, was another little boy. Now, to this, I mean, they sound incredible, but they're very well documented. And this, in particular case, father and a son going out fishing, and they were just by this little creek, and this actually happened here in Colorado. And the little boy, being who he was running up ahead, went around a bend. Now the creek was off to the right, the bend or the trail was right there, and the father goes around the bend, no son, and he becomes panicked and starts calling out to him, no answer. And finally he calls 911, says what's happened, and everybody's called out. Again, on a child, you definitely get everybody out there.
Sure.
Now, no signs of struggle, no signs, and he was within feet of his son when this happened. And had somebody come up behind this child, grabbed him, there would have been at least muffled cries or some kind of struggle. But again, there was nothing there. We investigated the situation because then, again, your law enforcement comes into play. Could the father have been involved in something not so good? And his record, no, he loved his boy dearly. They found the boy's clothes neatly folded 6.5 miles up the side of a mountain.
That's like that. There's no way that kid could have gotten up there. I take it.
No, and even it took hours for search and rescue to climb that mountain, and they're experienced.
Right. Exactly.
And I mean, it would have taken literally a day to climb to the top. And here you have a father he was pretty heavy set. So he's not going to be climbing a mountain anytime soon. But they were nicely folded, and it just really broke your heart to see that. But I mean, it gets stranger all the time when you're dealing with things like this.
Did they ever find the child? No. It's all just the clothes.
Just the clothes. Now, one of the strange thing is they always seem to find the shoes.
Yeah,
and this doesn't matter.
That. Isn't that
the shoes
strange?
are always placed together, like you do when you're home. You put your shoes together, and it's always kind of a telltale sign that there's something very peculiar going on. in a lot of cases, they'll find shoes. And then if they're lucky enough to find a body or something like that, or even if they find the individual alive, they have lost time, and it really doesn't make any kind of a sense as to what is happening. And so one of the other cases that hold on just once.
Sure.
So it's
King weighs 51.6 pounds.
but a case that we had up at Crater Lake National Park. Now, this was an individual who had been experienced in going out into the woods. Always carried a backpack. He was a photographer. And so he told his friend who dropped him off, come back for me in 3 days and I'll be right here waiting for you. And so the friend did exactly that. He came back, waited, no friend. No, this guy never showed back up. So it was getting dark and he was getting concerned a little bit. He knew that he was an experienced outdoorsman, but the thing was, he didn't pack a lot of stuff to go with it. And that was what was causing him more concern, was he didn't have enough food. And of course, being by himself. So of course he calls, and I was called in, I was flown in to investigate, because all I got out of it was, you're never going to believe this. I said, well, what am I not going to believe? You're not going to believe it. You're going to have to see it. And I went, okay, again, Ranger Mulder to the, onto his investigations. And so I get up there and I get the briefing on what had happened. And all I was told was they found him. Okay, that tells me a whole lot. Thank you for letting me know that you found him. Is he alive? Is he injured? Is he dead? Well, they said he's dead, but you're never going to believe this. And so they take me out, and all I heard from the other ranger that was driving me to the parking area was, in all the years, I've never seen anything like this.
And you must have been thinking, what am I going to see?
Yeah, so your curiosity does peak, and so you kind of brace yourself. So we track in. So we find his campground, and tent is still there. There is his backpack. Now, it had been rummaged through by animals. There were the shoes. And I said, well, where is he? And of course, I know by this time that if you're calling me in, it is going to be something really bizarre. They wouldn't, spend that kind of money to just have anybody go in. So we travel a little bit more up into the hills, and literally when we got there, I just stopped and my jaw must have dropped to the ground. There he was, sitting on a bench, or not a bench, but a down tree. Except it was only half of it.
What? And
that half was only his lower extremities. And it was still sitting in an upright position. So you've got the legs bent, sitting just like if you would sit down anywhere. The bend factors. Now the part, and it looked almost like a laser cut.
Right. I was going to ask you, in order to leave, I imagine, a body like that, You can't. It would have to be a clean slice.
Yeah.
Well,
And that's exactly what it was. And the clothes were still on it. Now, there were no feet, but the rest of him was still intact with the exception of his upper part. And we never did find the upper part of the torso.
oh, I
But
was
the
about
thing
to ask. You
was,
beat me to the next question. Did you find the other half of them?
now the strange part about it was, and you kind of made mention of this earlier, was there was no signs of any kind of creature feeding on him. There were no animal tracks around.
Yes.
And if a predator had gotten to him, they would have knocked him over.
Sure. Yeah.
Instead of having him sit right there like that. And
Of course.
I did it. And that's one of those where you go back and you write your report. Cause
It's
of
like,
death,
there's
unexplainable.
no other way to put this.
Right. And it's unexplainable. You don't have the answers. And you feel like you're kind of doing an injustice, especially me, because you can't, again, how do you tell your family you found somebody? Because they always, well, what happened to him? How did he die?
Let me ask something, Chris. What did they make an attempt to figure out how or what was used or how it was done?
And that's the other $60 million question right there.
They didn't know.
A lot of these things, a lot of these reports go by the wayside.
Okay.
That,
Because I'm thinking to myself, this, what, they're going to leave this with a big question mark. We found this deceased person, half of him sitting on a log in the middle of the forest. Okay.
well, and I've said this before in some strange things. So if anything strange goes over your broadcast, I had to kind of sign a disclosure form.
Okay.
A non-disclosure form. But I'm getting older, and I think that the people need to know what is going on in our parks, that they are not safe. And I don't know if it's by human force or something else, but
Right.
what happens is that you go back and you will go ahead and fill out a report, standard report. That in turn is given to your supervisor based upon what it pertains to. Then they'll forward it on to their supervisor or on to Washington. And what will usually happen is somewhere between the supervisor and Washington, the report goes missing.
Right. And
now
that's the thing you hear about. This is such a difficulty in getting information released.
Exactly. And the National Park Service is the only governmental agency that has such a vast amount of land, has law enforcement personnel working for them, but has no reporting system for missing people.
How can you? I don't understand that. Because you would think, let's take the weird aspect. By its very nature, you would think there's people that are going to get lost by accident or on purpose. It's like it's a given. When you're talking here, people that are going and basically where there's predators, they could get easily lost. So you would think, okay, we need to keep an accurate track because this is going to happen. You knew this was going to happen. And that there would be no way of nobody. It's like, no, let's not find out about those numbers. If we don't count, then it doesn't matter.
Well, and see, that's why I am starting to tell the story, because there are so few of us that really do know the ins and outs of what's happening, that I wouldn't feel good about looking in the mirror if I knew I was hiding things that could cause somebody's potential death.
Sure.
And the crap that I've been through, literally, it's a wonder I'm not insane, because this is stuff that's made for movies in a lot of cases.
Right. Sure.
And But when you're actually physically seeing it and you can't put a rational answer to it,
Exactly.
it does play with your brain a little bit.
Sure, because it's open-ended. You never get that. I don't like that word because I think it's overused, but the closure. In other words, you never get the explanation. You never understand how or what or whatever, and I know sometimes, in some cases of these missing people, sometimes they find skeletal remains,
Yeah.
sometimes years afterwards,
Oh, yeah.
sometimes. But from what I understand, a lot of these cases of these people that go missing, they never find anything, nothing.
No, and it is like they literally drop off the earth.
Right. And in
And
some cases, I've heard that even people that are very familiar with either hunters or outdoors, people that are familiar with going out, that you would think know better, if they get lost. Yeah, in other words, they're not like somebody, I just walked off and all of a sudden everything looks the same.
Yeah.
And they just, like you said, the earth swallows them up.
Yeah.
And I think, how can I tell you, I'm sure, well, obviously the numbers have been crunched. The odds on it are astronomical that it's like, okay, what? So everybody gets lost?
but the now, granted, there are people that do go out there and get lost, and of course, we find them. But those are the unexperienced, and
Sure.
also a lot of these people that are being, I can't say abducted. I don't know what it is, so I can't really put it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what?
But they are experienced people that have been doing this for years and years. They know what they're getting themselves into, and a lot of the non-experienced will only stay to the trails,
right?
The established trail system where hundreds of people walk a day. So if it just I used to always laugh because I was expecting to hear the Twilight Zone theme.
Well, what is it now that they say, make sure you're not the last one in line? Because I hear that you're like, though, that's like that's one of the that usually might get, like you said, you go around a bend on the trail and next thing you know, you're the last one in line, and but the person back there is, and I know from some of the research that they've done on this missing 411, he's kind of in some cases found a profile of certain people that are that end up going missing, disabilities, this and that. And I'm thinking to myself, that rules out the, because you think, okay, if there's somebody or something that you would say is just picking the last person in line, okay, then how does that count that you have a certain amount that always have certain common denominators? You see what I'm saying? If it's just opportunistic, you're not, that commonality, you rule it out. You just, whatever it is plucking the easiest one to get. You see?
Right.
But you hear that that's not the case, that there's a certain things that they, after a while, you say, okay, there's certain things that they all share for some reason. So it's a real mind bender.
Well, one of the other things is that in a lot of these cases, especially when we do find remains of individuals, you won't hear any insects. You won't see any insects. You won't even hear any birds. It's dead still and quiet. And no predator bothers them.
Yes.
And it's, it's just like you were saying about the cattle mutilations earlier. And that's what is causing that. And when they do, like I said, the autopsies, we never got a report back. Right. We never knew what the final disposition was. And so,
let me ask you, did you ever get a command from up the food chain where they told you guys, hey, we don't want you to let any more people in there? Did you ever get anything like, they wouldn't tell you why, but they would just tell you, no, you're on your own, baby. Come on in.
No. But I was told you don't repeat about this.
Oh, sure. I'm sure about that.
And I think more than anything, it was revenue.
Yeah.
They didn't want people to stop coming to the park systems.
Yes.
And, but the thing is, you go into a national forest, you don't pay a fee like you do a national park, state park, local park. But it's still happening all across in these areas. Now, is it because there's a larger group of people, better pickings for whatever is there? But I have had, again, it just keeps getting weirder and weirder and weirder, because you just, when you start to kind of start to wrap your head around it, then you'll get another call. You're not going to believe this. I'll tell you, Marley,
It's like
if I
okay.
could have a nickel for every
you
time
heard
I
that.
was told, you're never going to believe this, but, and I mean, I'd be a rich man. And it is so, so true. But even from your own, the people that you work with, you get that same feedback. But
yeah, it's like I imagine if when somebody like yourself that was a ranger, what are you doing for vacation? Yeah, anything but camping. You know? No, we're not
well,
going camping.
it's, I always would say, now, folks, you have a good day and a good visit, but be careful and always keep your children between you. The big one.
Wow.
And I never would say why, but just
Right.
that was it. But it's, you feel guilty
No.
when you can't go into further detail or say, like I said, you can't tell their loved ones what happened, because you don't know.
Right.
And you
Exactly.
feel like you're being hampered.
Yeah.
Okay, here I am. I'm a law enforcement officer for Park Service. I'm supposed to be doing law enforcement as well as doing search and rescue, doing all of these other things that park rangers do. And I'm being told to keep quiet.
Right.
We don't talk
Exactly.
about these things. And it's like you're standing in a doorway and having it slammed in your face, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well,
And I think that's
because
probably why a lot more of us are coming forward now.
yeah,
But
because I think after a while, it doesn't take much of an when you put yourself in that person's place, and at the very least, you know, it's like, you know, if I could at least offer you the comfort of knowledge, of giving you an explanation, you know, it's not going to maybe undo if this person passed away, but at least you understand, well, this is what happened. But from what you're
right.
telling me, you can't even do that for them. And I imagine that some of these people eventually, from what I've heard, a lot of these families, some like what you've described, they don't give up, but they're just resigned to, like, they're never going to get an answer.
And that's the most heartbreaking, is they'll come back a couple of years later. By any chance, have you found anything? Have you found any remains? No. Sorry. Come back another year later. They're always searching, hoping that somewhere something of a bone or something will be found that will put a little bit of closure, like you said, into place. But then you for the longest period of time, we were always, we could go out on patrol by ourselves.
Okay.
You know, our park, we know them. What could happen to us? That changed on one incident. Again, up at Yosemite, we had a missing ranger.
Really?
And so we had to start looking. And we got on horseback. We knew where he was going because he would report in, but via radio. But then those reports stopped, and it was just dead quiet.
Right.
And we finally tracked his horse down, because this is way back in the back boonies.
Right. This is people don't realize. No, GPS was not always around, or transponders, or anything like that.
Right. So we had to literally backtrack from where the horse came from.
Okay.
And what I saw, again, it's almost like I get these flashbacks, and I mean, I can see it so vividly. we found the ranger, the missing ranger. He was on a, now up in Yosemite, that whole area is filled with granite rocks because of the glacier age. And, so the glaciers would move these boulders, deposit them all over the place. Well, there was this pretty good size, probably the size of a bed boulder. And here was this ranger, and obviously he was dead, but he was laying on his back and he was bent over the rock. And
Like,
of course, just,
okay.
yeah, he wasn't just laying there. I mean, he was literally bent over backwards.
Backwards. Okay. I was going to ask
Yeah.
backwards. Okay.
Yeah. And so we, like I said, we obviously knew he was gone, but you always have to take, check the pulse or
Sure.
or whatnot. He looked odd. But it just, it wasn't normal. It wasn't a normal dead body.
Right.
And I went up and I felt for a pulse, and that's when I noticed it. There was no bone.
What?
Yeah. And we picked the body up because we had taken him out. So we had to put him over another horse, a pack horse. He had no bones.
Chris, you must have been thinking, I don't even know. I think I would probably stop thinking because I would have too many things. My brain would go oversaturation.
Yeah. Well, and that's what was so, you look at your partner that you're with and how can this be?
It's like, whatever you do, don't leave me alone. I imagine if this is a full grown man and you're like thinking, what happened to him?
And so we went ahead, we took him back. They did take him in. Now we did get a report back on him because that's when it had changed to having more than one ranger.
Did he, real quick, did he have any other injury? I mean, did you see any injury on him or wound or?
No, and that's what was so puzzling. Well, we found out that he did have bones. They were just pulverized.
How does, okay.
Pulverized to the point where it was like he was rubber.
Oh my God, that's horrible.
You pick up the hand and it was just like a rubber. It just would go. And again, you just don't know. So it was almost as if he was dropped from a very high altitude.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with that scenario, and I'm not going to be too descriptive, but there was no blood splatter. There was nothing to indicate.
Right, exactly. A point of impact.
Exactly, because usually when that happens, it's just a jelly mess. But
Yeah.
not in this case. And so.
No bones and no blood is what you're saying?
Yeah, just.
Because I wasn't going to say, okay, I was thinking, okay, to pulverize somebody's bone, you either crush them, which you would, get blood, or like you said, or fall. And even then, you think sometimes people don't fall flat. People either your head first, some part of your body meets the ground first.
Exactly.
Before the rest of you. So it's not like a uniform. And even then, and that after that they said no more solo
right
patrolling.
No more solo patrolling. So it started going to 2 ranger units, and those are at your busiest parks, and still even to your smaller parks, if they're, I mean, there are still some, like some of the national monuments that aren't very big, or some of your historical parks where you've got a ranger within 5 minutes of being there. But the wilderness ranger, oh, absolutely not. And it does. It's like I say, every place I went, it was always something different. And it's, I mean, it's like, I don't remember signing up for this.
Well,
because
I mean, I can imagine. It's got to be difficult just to handle, like you said, lost kids, but normal stuff. You know, it comes as part of the job that hey, people get lost, and sometimes they're children. But when there's that additional, what you're saying, that mystery, okay, I know that there's something more here, and I don't know what it is, and even that description of what happened to that ranger, that's incredible.
Yeah. So even we started to become more threatened, I guess would be the best word, by the parks that we served and swore to protect.
Sure.
And you don't know who's in control of what is out there. And
yeah, because you guys are at the very bottom of the totem pole as far as the food chain that goes up from, like you said, once you provide reports, and that's it. That you got to let it go. You got to let that paperwork go.
Yeah. And it just, after a while, it started making me think, okay, what's going to be next on the list? And am I going to make it out of this job alive?
Chris, let me ask you something. Did you ever, were you involved in an investigation? Were you there where all of a sudden you saw some type of investigation unit that was not you guys, because obviously you're the ones that are assigned to it, come in to help? You're like, what are you guys doing here? Did that ever happen?
Oh, yes. Oh,
really?
Yes. Yeah, there was a couple times where there would be reports of UFO sightings, for instance. Now, like I told you, the Park Service doesn't have a missing persons issue.
Right.
So technically, we are federal employees. That is our jurisdiction, regardless. We would get reports, and I swear they have our uniforms tagged with something or some kind of transmitting device that is going right to it. On most of the cases where there was a UFO sighting, especially if it was an alleged landing of a craft, either the military would show up or the FBI would show up. Now, the FBI really is not involved in missing persons.
No, you think of them as for crime or abductions, kidnappings, but that's about it.
Exactly.
I mean, kidnappings as in, like regular kidnappings, but otherwise that's not what you would think they would do.
No, they're federal employees. I'm a federal employee. Technically, we're the same.
Yeah.
We would go in and we would literally be told, leave the site now. You will be told what to say. If you have a problem with that, talk to your supervisor. The military would literally be there with their weapons. And you're going, okay, my 9mm isn't going to go against.
It's like, yeah, what are you going to do? It's like, all right. Then, that's it. That's incredible. You hear these stories and sometimes you think that is this hyperbolic as far as these descriptions, because you don't want to believe it. How can I tell you? You don't want to believe that there's this, I don't know what you want to call it. This manipulation. How's that? Of these occurrences. And how can you dispute when somebody comes in on the scene and does exactly what you described? Be quiet. Don't ask questions, and get out of here, or go speak to your supervisor. That's it. Just don't talk to anybody about any of this.
And they always threaten you in whatever manner. You know who you are. We know who your family is. Of
course.
And of course, that puts the fear of God into you.
Sure.
And you go, well, who's going to believe me anyway, really, in a long ways? And they make you think that nobody's going to believe what you say, or they give you some misinformation. And it's like, what are we hiding?
Well, see, and this is the thing. And I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because this is, I think, till very recently, now that things are changing a little bit, I think a lot, for years and years and years, of anybody that came forward to talk about anything along those lines, whether it's UFOs or they would somehow they would angle to make the person look like a nut.
Yeah.
You know, not like as in I walk around talking to myself, but they're like, oh man, they're just imagining stuff. They're making stuff up. The persecution complex. So basically, like they discredit the person. So after a while, like you said, who's going to believe me? Because now I'm thought of as a nut.
Yeah. Well, I've got to admit, I'm one of the guilty when I say you're not going to believe this, but
Yeah. Well, you know what? A lot of people, it's, and then you think, okay. I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand maybe there's certain things that your government doesn't want you to know because I understand about national security. I get it.
Mhm.
But then there's things like this that you're like, okay, come on. This is not a national security thing. There's something else going on here. And it's like, yeah. And I think that it makes you wonder, are they ever, well, you've seen lately, they're kind of hinting that they're going to disclose more about UFOs. Do you think they're actually going to do it? I thought not. Okay. I wanted to see what you said.
They really can't because it would cause undue panic. It would be very similar to Orson Welles' version of the War of the Worlds, except now our techno gear is 10 times more elaborate.
Sure.
That it would go around the world instantaneously.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
our religion, our philosophy, psychology, people would have heart attacks. If now we all know that there is something more, but until we actually acknowledge it, it doesn't necessarily have to be real. The monster under the bed is only a monster under the bed until you grow up, and then you can dismiss it. But you're never going to look to find and see that monster under the bed. And if you do, you're going to have problems. And that's kind of where we're at. They may one day say, and they have, scientifically, the percentage of inhabitable planets is X times Z to the 200th portion, which means that there's 100,000 planets out there that are capable of life. I think that's going to be the extent.
But you know what? I think most people are good with the idea of like, hey, I think most people understand or know, or I mean, there's got to be lots of other worlds out there that have some type of life, whether it's life as we know it, carbon-based or something else. Maybe there's something. I think the problem comes in with what you said when they tell you, yeah, but they're here. That's when everything changes.
Yeah. And, but you see certain little things changing.
Yes.
Even Pope Francis came across and said that he believed that there is life on other planets. Now, where in the Bible does it say there's not? And, it's just, we have to slowly acclimate if that's the case. But there again, the powers that be, called the U.S. government, don't want our competitors to know that we may have advanced technology, which it's obvious we do. Well, where did we get that? You look in the last 60 years, how far we've come in our technology.
Kitty Hawk?
Yeah, I mean, we skyrocketed. And especially after the alleged Roswell accident.
Do you think they're friendly? I'm going to ask you this.
I think there are species that are.
Okay.
And I think there are species that are not.
Okay.
And I think that they are not necessarily evil, but they're looking at us like a bunch of lab rats, just like we experiment. And
it's scary. That in and of itself is scary. I don't think that sometimes we want to place our moral compass as humans on things that are from another world, which it's like you said, it's not that they're evil. It's just that they don't judge things good or bad the way we do.
Right.
And that's still scary. That's still scary. Even when you look at cattle mutilations and things that they do.
But there again, you can see these things. And your brain is telling you one thing, but there's that safety door that lets you go in and say, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You're absolutely right.
unless it affects me directly, it's not real.
Yeah.
And I think that's a part of our mechanism of how we survive.
Sure.
And it's not a good thing, because again, there's going to have to be a day when, and I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a mass sighting. I hate to use some of the movies as an example.
I know.
If you get a 10-mile mothership up above,
Yeah, that's not a weather balloon.
Washington,
It's not
it's
a weather
gonna
balloon. Or that's not something coming in off that Air Force base out there. Nah.
yeah, it's not one of ours.
Yeah,
And
right, exactly. It's not one of ours.
so unless that happens, but the problem too is that our movie industries
Yes.
have done so well at making these movies of malevolent entities versus benevolent entities. I mean, literally, I can think of 3 movies where the aliens proved to be positive. The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original, not the remake. That sucked.
Oh yeah, no, it was horrible.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and E.T.
And E.T. Yeah.
All the others are bam, boom, let's blow up the world.
Independence Day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, so why wouldn't we be afraid?
Yeah.
And because it's ingrained in our mentality. But there again, we're afraid of what we don't know. So unless it's taught to us and we're educated in a scope where we see them communicating with us or with our national leaders, there's still going to be that little piece in the back of our head that's going to say, oh yeah, you just watched, in 24 hours they're going to start firing on us.
Well, you know what? I think also what concerns most people is that you think at the very least they are technologically more advanced than us, which means they have superiority over us. And us, we consider ourselves king of the hill here as far as the earth is concerned. Okay, so for us to have whatever they are here, which we know at the very least, because just of the fact that you're here, that you outgun us when it comes to technology, it's like, yeah, you could, I hope you're nice. How's that?
Yeah. Well, and it's true. If they wanted to do away with us, they would have done so a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
I feel. We're no threat to them per se. I mean, the more we go out into space, unless we learn from our mistakes, which I sure wish to God we do, as long as we don't,
you know, well, but see, it's the same thing. We're not a threat to them, which is maybe why they haven't, like you said, annihilated us, but that doesn't mean they don't have the capabilities of doing so.
Exactly.
And I guess that's what wigs people out to know, you know, and let's face it, if you go by, let's use that show Ancient Aliens, that you think, okay, they've been around then for thousands of years, whether the same ones or different ones, it's like, okay, you know, we're like a big lab, you know, lab rats for them.
Yeah.
And nobody, I mean, let's face it, we're used to being the ones that use lab rats, not being the lab rats. And I think a lot of people would have a hard time getting that, like, hey, they're nice, and it's almost like, yeah, but because they want to be, not because we're on a level playing field. It's let me, I'm waiting. I agree with you though. I think that if there is any disclosure, it'll sound like a lot of, and then when you analyze it, it'll be a lot of nothing. It's like, I already knew that. I knew that too. Like where's the disclosure part? You know, when are you going to really say something definitive?
Right.
I think that that's what's going to happen.
I mean, with the Nimitz videos, that's caused a lot of people to perk up and say, now the Navy just said they're following something, they don't know what it is. And I think more stuff is going to have to be sneaked out, or
Yes.
something in order to contribute to that the higher ups can't handle. And it really, I hope that when that day comes, this is my true hope for the future, is that when the day comes and these entities are benevolent and they come in peace, that we will stop all of this crap on this planet. This white, this black, this Chinese.
Maybe
this
that's
black.
what that's what they're waiting for, and they're going, oh, they're at it again. They're just like, when are they going to get it?
Well, how are we going to deal with multi-species if
Yeah,
we
I
can't
know,
even get along with our own species?
Exactly. That's.
And
But by the
it's,
way, you want to unite the human race? Throw an extraterrestrial in the mix, and then all of a sudden, everybody's like, us humans, all those
yes,
differences will cease to exist.
exactly.
It won't matter nothing.
Yeah.
It'll be like us humans. It's like that's all you need to know.
Better human than green.
No, yeah, man, that'll be like that's it. It's like that'll put everything in perspective real quick.
Oh,
Petty foolishness will stop immediately.
oh man, oh Lord, it's true.
Yeah.
It really is. They'll find something, but I do hope that we eventually evolve into
Sure,
a
of course, that's what we can hope
understanding,
for.
more caring race. And at that time, yeah, I do believe that there will be some, I mean, using Star Trek as an example, some kind of a multi-planetary federation and all the opportunities that would be bestowed. I remember years ago, they were talking to this professor, and I thought it was the biggest crock of you know what. Because he was saying, well, we know that there cannot be extraterrestrial life visiting our planet because you can only go near the speed of light. And I thought, you're talking about a race that could be thousands of years more advanced.
As far as what we know how to do, that's about it.
Exactly. That's based on our credibility, not some other race that predates us God knows how long.
That's what I'm saying. So that's like the comfort food kind of like logic. It's like, yeah, I mean, I think too hard on this. They can't. They're too many light years away anyway, so forget it. Let's not worry about that. I gotta go pay my car note. Hold on. Or wait. There's a great show coming on Netflix. I don't want to, that kind of like mentality. Like, that's too much. Yeah, and I understand there's people that this is how they function, and that's just the way it is. The human condition. Where
you look at how many times we go to work, we come home, dinner, watch TV, go to bed, get up, go to work, come home, have dinner.
It becomes a blur.
It's redundancy. There's a few out there. There's a few great minds and new changes. But again, when I was young and so forth, and I'm sure you remember this too. People used to be able to make change, and they would count out the change, the clerk, and they would know how to make out that change. Now, if it doesn't know what it is on a machine, they have no clue. And
let me tell you something. I remember my first job. When they would hire extra people around Christmas time, and I remember one of my first jobs was like that. It was those old registers where you would just punch in the thing, and exactly like what you said. You had to give change back. And I had never done this before. I was in high school. And I remember, as a matter of fact, that my boss's name was Mr. Bliss. I've never forgotten it. He put me through the ringer, but he showed me how to give back change. Yeah. And at the beginning, I was like a nervous wreck. And you know what? Once you get over it, once your mind goes, click, okay, I get it. And like you said, nowadays you tell somebody, hey, they're going to give you a 20 and it costs $17.32. What's their change going to be? It's going to be $2 and what, 68 cents or something like that. Right. They'd be like, huh?
They don't have a clue. And I've even caught, sometimes they'll take out the change, and their minds kind of short out, because like you say,
Yes.
oh, here, let me just round this out. Well, rounding it out means you're not going to give out
Yes.
any change,
Exactly.
but their minds just go into deep freeze because they've already put it into the
Yes.
machine.
Yes,
And they're
yes.
looking at the machine like it's mysteriously and magically going to tell them what the right answer is. And it's pretty pathetic.
Yes,
And
it is.
now,
It is.
too, you know, in the 60s, I remember seeing one of the first computers, and it was the size of a building.
Yeah.
And now we've got computers
Like
that,
the microchip.
it's, you know, that do everything that these things couldn't do. I mean, we can communicate, we can
Mhm.
look up encyclopedias, we can, I mean, it's
Sure.
it's amazing what
Yeah, it is. It is. People don't
technology has.
realize that. But you know, the only ones that have the benefit of that are people that have been around for just a little bit, you know, a little bit
Exactly.
beyond the year 2000, before the year 2000. I'm going to use that as the breakaway point.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, I used to laugh when I was in 8th grade because my teacher said, and by the year 2000, everybody will have a computer. I went, oh, yeah, right.
yes. Yeah.
And
You
it,
were
and it
thinking, yeah,
happened.
well, yeah. And what, that extra
Well,
building by your house?
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's true. Most of us have not only one, we've got several.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Exactly.
you know, one day we'll have to talk about one of the discoveries I kind of made regarding technology, and it kind of goes into religious philosophy and dealing with the Antichrist and technology.
Wow.
And
We gotta, you, okay, Chris. All right. I'm going to be, spoiler, I'm going to be contacting Chris right away for a follow-up show on this. He said all the right words. You all know, so you don't have to ask me to bring him back. I am going to bring him back. What do you think about that? See, there you go.
oh, sure.
It's like that.
Yeah,
Because
it's
it's that right there. We're on the right track with that. As far as I would love to hear what you got to tell me about that. But anyway, Chris, because for my podcast listeners, but I am going to have a link in the credits of the show. But for my podcast listeners, what's the website they can go to if they want to get more information, contact you, anything like that?
it's at anubisparanormal.wix.com
Okay.
/APRO. We're also on Facebook and on Facebook group pages. We have all of our different chapters on there.
Right.
And we're also on all the other social media. If you want to get in contact with us, we're at Anubis Paranormal Research Org at gmail.com.
Right. So in other words, because you told me you've got different chapters in different parts of the country. So, you know, if somebody's in a certain part, you could get, maybe there's a chapter that's close by that could help them out.
Exactly.
All right. It has been wonderful to speak to you, Chris.
Oh,
I really missed our conversations. It's, you know, I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. Probably to tomorrow, the day after, you're going to be getting that email, and we're going to schedule that new show because I want to talk about that.
Okay. Well, make sure you remember what happened last time when we were closing.
No, you know what? I'm glad you brought that up. You remember, and I don't know if you remember, I got an EVP on our show of a cat meowing.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say.
I heard your cat, and you're like, "What cat?" By the way, I didn't have cats. I had no cats.
Exactly.
You mentioned to me in that show something about your mom liking cats.
Yeah.
But this was at the very beginning of the conversation. And it was like this right about now towards the end. And when I played back, you know, I revert and I'm like, hey, there's a cat. And when we talked, I say, hey, your cat. And you're like, I don't have a cat. I was like, but yeah, I heard your cat meowing in the background.
Oh, now there is something else for another show. Since I've left the Park Service per se, I'm still on as a consultant. So I still do go out and investigate. But I've been, when I was very young, my dad told me, he says, I don't care what you do, but choose two careers. So if one doesn't work out, you'll always be able to fall back on the other. And so I chose veterinary science as my secondary.
Oh,
and so that's what I'm doing now.
Okay.
I'm working in a vet hospital, and I can tell you a lot about pet ghosts.
Oh, we got to talk about that because I'm an animal lover. God knows. I've got 9 dogs. Wait a minute. Hold on a minute. Hold the thought. So everybody's like, hold on. Oh. So for everybody, this is my old girl. This is my little
Oh,
itty. She's 17 years old.
oh
Quick
my
girl. Okay, she's one of those applehead chihuahuas. Okay.
Mhm.
She's been my traveling companion because she was so small that I could take her in one of these holder. She's been to the White House. She's been to Times Square. She's been to Central Park. I've taken her
Oh,
everywhere. I've taken her so
yeah.
small, and she was a good girl. I've snuck her into restaurants. She would just sit there, and I would take a little something, and then I would sneak it and put it in that little holder because it was a SpongeBob. You know, it looked like almost like a purse. Little did
Right.
anybody know. Nowadays, everybody carries their pets everywhere.
Yeah.
But I was carrying her around with me all over the place, and I've got her, of course, next to me on the pillow. That's my oldest and smallest of my 10
Oh,
dogs.
oh,
So that's what I'm saying. We're on the yeah, you got to come back. Maybe that's going to be show
oh,
number
absolutely.
3. But yeah, okay. If anybody, the cat wants to come back and meow, go ahead. All right, Chris. Thank you so much. It has been wonderful to talk to you. Okay.
Oh, with you as well. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.
Yay. I'm going to bring Chris back, and we're going to talk about technology and the Antichrist. You better believe it, baby. See, isn't he a great guest? Mm-hmm. He is. I hadn't talked to him. You know, time gets. You know what? It's really funny because it seems like the other day that I had my first interview with Christopher George, and back then he was living in California, and he did a lot of investigations into Queen Mary. He was, man, let me talk about knowing the stories, actual firsthand experience going on to the Queen Mary. And believe it or not, I said, you know what? Let me talk to him. I want to catch up with him because I was thinking, you know, they're going to open up the Queen Mary now. I know that a lot of restrictions for travel and vacations are going to be gone. And I was thinking, I wonder what's happened, you know, all this time that this ship has been on lockdown, you know, because, and the reason I'm going with this is that, you know, sometimes, especially somebody like him who knows people that work there, there's no traffic, you know, humans are gone. So a lot of these people that work at these places, all of a sudden they get a wealth of new experiences. They hear new things just because there's no foot traffic. There's nobody there. And I thought, you know what, if anybody's going to know about this, it's going to be Chris George. Come to find out, because of course time speeds along, he's no longer in California. I mean, he still has contacts out there. Like, you know, you heard what he said all about as far as what's going on with the Queen Mary. And now he's in Colorado, which is just as well. But either way, he is, I love talking to him because he knows the stuff. And like he said, you know, there's a lot of times where people in their professional lives, you know, doesn't have to necessarily be a first responder or anything like that. You witness certain things where if you're not told directly, shut up and don't say anything. It's like the unknown rule, the unknown fact. You want to kill your career? Talk about it. So in other words, you don't have to be told, don't say anything. You know it. It's like everybody knows, you know, like everybody knows, hey, that boss, that's a cool guy, that's a nice guy, that's a person that you work for, this person. No, they're great. No, work for that person. But, you know, it's like the unwritten, you know, everybody after a while, you're in on the same groove. And same thing. And everybody thinks, well, you know what, it's the military or, you know, law enforcement. They're the ones that are told, you know, be quiet or don't say anything, or, you know, you're going to lose your credibility. And then, you know, you'll never outrun it and you can just forget about advancement. There's a lot of different, how can I say, job types that it was the same thing. If you heard or witnessed anything unusual, if you weren't told outright, it was implied, or it was kind of like, hey, if you ever hear, don't talk, yeah, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. I'm not gonna go into specifics. I've heard of a certain bank down in Miami, had been around for a very long time, and eventually, there was certain people there were having certain experiences, certain sightings, and basically they were told, be quiet, don't say anything. Because the last thing, think of it, a bank wants to get as a reputation that it's a haunted bank, or that people are seeing things, or that employees, there's a lot of different fields where people are told, you know, even if you come to your supervisor, like it's like your supervisor's hoping you're not going to come and talk to me about that, are you? Please don't do that. Don't do that. Like, in other words, I don't want to know about that. Okay. And then there's people that are just going to say, well, that was once upon a time. I beg to differ. Yeah, I think there's more transparency now because, yes, you've seen all these paranormal reality shows and blah, 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 and disclosure and blah, 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 and whistleblowers. Blah, blah. Let me tell you, stuff like that is more the exception than the rule. The majority of people, whether sometimes it's not even a question of advancement. It's a question of, like, I just want to keep my job, and I don't want to be known as either that guy or that girl or whatever, who, guess what? You just be quiet. You just keep it to yourself, whatever it is. And this could go from paranormal manifestations to UFO sightings to, depending on what you do, just weird stuff, unexplained stuff, things like what he was describing, what he did. After a while, you're like, yeah, I know what this is. And then, a lot of times exactly like what he described towards the end of in other words, you're not there working anymore. And it's like, and maybe this has really weighed heavy on you for a while because you're thinking, man, this is not right. That Americans don't know about this, or the public doesn't know about this. This is not right. Like, why the secrecy over something like this unless, even if it means more heartbreak for a family, or just the fact that it's being kept hidden, and a lot of people finally, like, Chris, you decide, yeah, I want to talk about it. Anyway, to be honest with you, a lot of what he's saying, I want to say so much, is not disclosure as in confirmation. Okay, when a lot of us have heard these stories, and then you hear somebody that actually did it confirming, like, no, you know what, this is not some crackpot story, or these descriptions are not way out there. This actually does happen, and I witnessed it firsthand. However, and that's another thing. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of times these people, when I said people, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, like, for example, his job, this food chain goes all the way up to Washington. Let's say if you're a federal employee, he's the one on the front lines. He's the person that deals with the public or in the parks or everything. And then whatever, you don't know, once that report is released, whose hands it goes through. In other words, they don't put it in just a local office. And a lot of these people are kept in the dark as well. Everybody thinks that they're part of the problem. No, they're not problem. Sometimes they're victimized as well, in the sense of they're not told either. They're never given any explanation. But they have to carry the burden of knowing there's something here that's not right. And I saw this, and even I don't know what really this is about, or what the outcome is, or how did this happen? Okay. This is stuff that people, after a while, unless you're a little psychopath and you don't care, you don't have a conscience, it becomes like a heavy burden when you think this is not right. And by the way, that's a good thing. But at the time, again, if you have to support a family, if you've got a mortgage, you're living your life. And part of you saying, you know what, this is not right, but God, I need my job. I've got plans. I've got responsibilities. I've got a family that's depending on me. Okay. Do I want to find out that if I say anything, what's going to come of this? Or like when he was saying that, you have agencies that kind of tell you, we know who you are. Do you really want to call their bluff and find out, hey, I wonder if these guys really mean it? I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't. And because when you weigh it in the balance, it's like, nah, you know what? I can't risk it. I feel bad thinking that something's being kept either from the public or from the family or whatever the case might be. And then I think that after a while that you carry this around and maybe you come to another point in your life, maybe it's 20, 30, 40 years later, you're like, man, I gotta unburden myself somehow. And maybe nobody will believe me, or somebody will say, yeah, I've heard of that, or I saw that as well, or, things of that nature. It wouldn't be the first time that historically people look back and they'll say, you know what, there was a whistleblower or somebody that said something, or, there was these stories going around that everybody said, oh, that's a bunch of come to find out 20, 30, 40 years later, people say, man, they were saying the truth. They were describing the truth. So again, I'm going to bring Chris back for that follow-up interview for sure. If you have any stories, if you want links to the videos or any of the podcast platforms for any of the shows, go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com. Also, if you want to listen to the podcast version of any of the shows without commercial interruption, okay, you can go to my website, okay, and I usually point it out to where you could go, where basically you can download the MP3 file, okay, or just click it and listen to it. Let's say if you got on your computer or your phone, you can actually listen right then and there if you don't want to store it. That's if you really want to listen to it without commercial interruption. And again, you can go MiamiGhostChronicles.com for information on either the shows, new book projects I got. If you want to submit a story to me, MarlenePardo.com, same thing. You can email me at Marlene@MiamiGhostChronicles.com. The other podcast series are NightshadeDiary.com and Supernatural Storytime. And I've got a lot of fabulous guests lined up. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. And, that there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in our reality, and it is what it is. So sometimes I'm hoping that some of these shows, they kind of provide the entertainment and the time to kind of like, hey, like, what I say, like suspend your disbelief a little bit. If you're one of these type of people like, oh, this, BS, let go of that for a little bit and just listen to us. Listen to the theories, even if at the end you go, man, they're crazy. And you know what? It helps you not worry, or maybe just if you've got things going on where you're worried about a lot of different things that are going right now on in our world, that it just suspends you for a little bit of time, and then you have to deal with reality again. Even though I personally think that a lot of the things that we're talking about is grounded in reality, but it just lets you relax a little bit and think about, man, that's the what ifs. The what ifs that. There's so many things, so many mysteries in our world. So again, guys, thank you so much for being part of my audience. You're all wonderful. And please come back next week for another show.